Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Access to Banking for Survivors, Workshop 6. We're gonna just hang out here for a minute and let people log on, and we'll be back with you in just a second. Welcome, everyone. We're just still seeing people log on. I just wanted to welcome you all and let you know you're at the right place if you are here to be a part of our amazing workshop we have planned for you today, Access to Banking for Survivors. And we'll probably just give it another minute and then we'll get started. All right, everyone, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know some people will continue to log on, but it's 12:03 right now in San Diego, and we're so excited to have all of you with us today. I'm super excited to let you know that we have participants from 19 states. So for us here at Free to Thrive, it's the most states that have participated in one of our Financial Empowerment Academy workshops. So we're just super honored and grateful that you're joining us today for this really incredibly impactful webinar. Next slide. Just a few housekeeping things before we get started. Please make sure you have selected speaker view in the top right corner of your Zoom window. If you have any technical issues at any time during the workshop, please reach out to our training coordinator, the awesome Mira, who is behind the scenes today. Her email is mira@freetothrive.org. Please note that you are all muted and we cannot see you. Most importantly, we expect a lot of questions today for this incredible content you will be hearing. So please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We generally wait to answer a lot of the questions till the end of our workshops, but Dion today from the Free to Thrive team will also be participating in the conversation. So we will answer some questions along the way, but please note that if you put something in the chat, we'll get to you, get to those questions at the end of the hour. Next slide, please. In case you've missed our past trainings, You can go to the Free to Thrive website, and all of the Financial Empowerment Academy workshops are recorded. There are some great information, other amazing workshops we've done over almost the last 2 years now, and those are available to view at any time on our website. Next slide, please. Again, I want to welcome all of you to Free to Thrive's Financial Empowerment Academy Workshop 6. My name is Susie Day, and I am the Director of Development and Survivor Empowerment Programs here at Free to Thrive. We're super excited about our academy. We launched the very first workshop in February of 2020, which at that time we were excited to have an in-person workshop. But the silver lining with COVID is that we have been able to do all of our workshops since then virtually, and being able to obviously reach survivors and service providers across the country, like the 19 states that are represented today. Next slide. Free to Thrive's Financial Empowerment Academy is a first of its kind that gives participants the skills, tools, and support to become financially empowered and independent. This free program is designed for survivors of trafficking, their families, and those that serve survivors. Again, this is workshop 6. This is our first workshop since April this year. And we're just super excited that we were able to get one more in, and one really valuable and important workshop before the end of the year. So again, thank you so much for joining us. Next slide. We have an amazing guest speaker today, along with our incredible client liaison, Dion, and she will kind of be more of a moderator as Sarah goes through her presentation. But we have Sarah Byrne, who is an incredible attorney and survivor advocate with Moore and Van Allen in North Carolina, and she has been instrumental in being a huge part of kind of launching this financial sector initiative to support survivors and their banking needs across the country. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Sarah.
Thank you so much, Susie. Thank you, Dion. Thank you from everybody at Free to Thrive. Free to Thrive has been a great partner with the program that I'm involved in. And so I was really quite flattered and excited when I was invited to speak to you all at this academy. If you wouldn't mind advancing the slide. So regrettably, Taushia is unable to join us today. She had a last-minute emergency, and she absolutely wanted me to send you all her deepest regrets. She was really excited about participating in the program. And I will tell you that she is one of the most resilient, strong, and empowered people I have ever met. So while I hope that I can impart some helpful information to you all today, my real hope is that you'll be able to hear from her in some other capacity as she continues to grow as a survivor advocate. And I'll tell you a little bit more about her needs and her experience with reentry into the banking sector as we go through the program. So you will hear about her experience. You just won't get to hear from her today. If you wouldn't mind advancing the slide. So I'll start by telling you a little bit about my work. As Susie had mentioned, I'm an attorney in Charlotte, North Carolina, with a firm called Moore and Van Allen. And in that role, I lead the firm's Human Trafficking Pro Bono Project, which is a program through which we provide free legal representation to survivors of sex and labor trafficking. And as many of you could probably imagine what those needs would be, I'll describe them. We endeavor to provide comprehensive legal services, so we will meet any of the legal needs that a survivor comes to the firm with. If we don't have the expertise or the competence or capacity to handle that matter, we will work with an outside organization or firm or lawyer to make sure that that need is met. So those needs, like many of you know, the needs of trafficking survivors are really vast and various. And so they range from, we do a lot of expunction and vacatur work for survivors who have past criminal records, either records that related to their exploitation or otherwise. We also provide victim witness representation if they would like to, or if they are working with law enforcement to prompt an investigation or respond to questions about an investigation from law enforcement or prosecutors in the investigation and prosecution of the trafficker. And that representation starts from the very beginning of interface with law enforcement through to a plea phase or a trial phase, and all the way through sentencing and enforcement of restitution and all the other rights that they are entitled to throughout that criminal process. And then another, what I call sort of the third area of service, is comprised of everything else. We do a lot of custody work for survivors who've lost visitation or custodial rights to their children. We do name changes. We do some landlord-tenant work. We've done tax work for survivors. We provide immigration relief in the form of T visas or other for survivors who are foreign-born. So as I said, we really try to meet the comprehensive needs of survivors that come through the door. The other part of my work is I work with the firm's institutional clients, companies, and organizations that have a responsibility to respond to trafficking or have a social responsibility to respond to trafficking. So primarily, I work with financial institutions in their obligations to identify human trafficking and financial flows, but also to engage in other programming, whether it's workforce training or to engage in survivor support programs like one that we'll talk about today. So again, there's the pro bono side, which is meeting the legal needs of survivors, and then the working with institutions to support their programming in identifying and combating trafficking and supporting survivors. As you can see from the slides, we do a lot of other things such as trainings like today, and some legislative advocacy. Since I have the mic and no one's cutting me off, I'll take this opportunity to just mention two pieces of potential federal legislation that I think this group would be interested in. The first is what's called the Debt Bondage Repair Act, and that, if passed, will ease the process for survivors to have negative accounts or adverse information on a credit report that resulted from being exploited, trafficked, either through identity theft or coerced debt. So if passed, what it would do, it would require the credit reporting agencies to not include accounts that were, again, coerced due to a trafficking experience. So I'll actually take this opportunity to mention that our work here at the law firm, while it primarily started as legal advocacy work, we have grown into this financial inclusion space. And we do have a part of our program includes credit repair, where we work with survivors to go through their accounts and see if we can seek forgiveness, reduction, or perhaps a payment plan with each creditor so that they can clean up, just bad credit and hopefully improve their credit score.
Sarah.
Yes.
Is this specific to North Carolina, or is this nationwide?
The Debt Bondage Repair Act is a piece of federal legislation, so that would help survivors all across the country. The work that we do, the credit repair work that we do at the firm, its intention was to serve survivors in our area, but we have received some referrals from other parts of the country. And at this point, with our really robust volunteer pool, we've been able to support those referrals. And I'll mention that this is a few, and you see the collaboration with the Charlotte Triage Pro Bono Partnership. That's a program, it's local to Charlotte, but what it is it's interested volunteers at law firms or the employers in the area, which everybody probably knows, Charlotte is sometimes called Bank Town. We have several banks that either have headquarters or a significant presence here in Charlotte. And a lot of financial professionals want to volunteer to support survivors. So we have trained them to do this credit repair work. So that's how we've been able to meet some of the referrals that have come from other parts of the country. But I'll mention what we're starting to do is train other financial services organizations and advocates to do repair work themselves on a local basis. So ideally, we'll have this capacity everywhere in the country to support survivors. And I know it's happening in other parts as well. And I think the Academy had a credit repair training program. So I'm so that's already been addressed. So I won't focus too much on that. But the other piece of federal legislation that I wanted to draw everyone's attention to would be a federal vacatur bill, which is, as many people on the call probably know, there are some state statutes that allow survivors to have a criminal record that they incurred erased if they can show that it related to their experience of being trafficked, which is common.
Right.
Most of our sex trafficking survivors have had their own criminal records. And so the work that we've done is to try to clear up those criminal records through a statute that understands that that is a common occurrence, and allows for that process to petition the courts to have basically the conviction reversed. So at the federal level, currently there doesn't exist that statutory framework. So it's a real gap. So when we have survivors that have federal records, meaning they were convicted or charged by a federal court, we don't have a way to remedy that. So that is a piece of legislation. It's not as advanced in the process as the Debt Bondage Repair Act, but I'm hoping, we're all hoping, all of us that are in this work, that we will start to see it get more attention, and we'll keep everybody informed of that. And that's a good time to mention the National Survivor Law Collective, because Free to Thrive is a founding member of the National Survivor Law Collective and is the organization that asked my firm to participate in it as well. So together we serve on the leadership team, and the National Survivor Law Collective is a network of lawyers across the country that provide trauma-informed legal services at no charge to survivors. So our goals for now are to try to grow that network, so to continue, training lawyers so that they can provide these services, but that also our network is so connected that we can connect survivors to a lawyer in their area more quickly. We spend a lot of time, for example, I'll use Taushia, my co-presenter, as an example. She had legal needs in other parts of the country. So I spent a lot of time trying to identify pro bono counsel in those areas to meet her needs. With the National Survivor Law Collective, that network already exists. There's a listserv where, without sharing confidential information, we can put a request out for a need for a pro bono in that area and very quickly connect the survivor with an attorney in the area. So stay posted for more work from the National Survivor Law Collective, because we're doing a lot of research and having lots of conversations about how to make legal services more accessible all across the country, particularly in places that we've identified as legal deserts, where survivors don't have access to legal services.
Sarah,
go ahead.
Because we're on the topic of access to banking, how does the Debt Bondage Act factor into banking and credit when it comes to survivors
That's
and
great.
becoming financially independent?
That's great, and a perfect transition into the real subject of today. So it's sort of like, one begets the other. If you don't have great credit, it's hard to credit. And you can build good credit if you have a successful relationship with, a bank through banking products and services. So they really are intertwined. So let's take it from there. Let's flip the slide, and we'll talk about. Well, I will make a note when we flip the slide. I was going to mention a little bit about when we get to Taushia's experience. I'll tell you a little bit more about her personally. But access to banking services is so important in order to, as we say, build good credit, but also it's so important to maintain our financial independence so that our assets, as minimal as they may be, are protected, and that they can have an opportunity to grow, and that we participate in the financial sector, which really is set up to hopefully enable us to thrive and grow wealth and be able to achieve our own goals. So to that end, I'm going to try to keep this brief without going into too much history. But several years ago, in about 2018, 2019, the United Nations, in response to a call from G7 countries that said, we now realize human trafficking is such an enormous global problem that primary ways that we can combat human trafficking and support victims is to empower the financial services industry to help us find human trafficking, prevent human trafficking, and then support survivors. So they engaged in something called the Finance Against Slavery and Trafficking Initiative, which was a group of financial services professionals, survivor advocates, other stakeholders that came together and published what's called a blueprint. And I can provide access to that blueprint. It's on the internet. It's the FAST blueprint. And it sets out basically a roadmap for what financial institutions, and we'll just say banks for ease of conversation, that banks can do to do these very goals that we talked about. So I'm going to not spend very much time on the first few bullets, but it's really a comprehensive blueprint. And it talks about banks themselves have a responsibility to look in their company and in their supply chains, any vendors they might use, but also to companies that they might loan to or have other commercial relationships to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do to detect trafficking, but also to know where risks might lie in their supply chains, again, in all of their relationships. The FAST initiative blueprint also talks about how to mitigate risks, how to try and avoid having relationships with companies, organizations, industries that might have maybe a higher likelihood of being involved in facilitating trafficking. They encourage financial institutions to make investments in geographic locations, particular products, or just other organizations that would help prevent trafficking, maybe where there's high risk. And then finally, and the one that you can tell is most near and dear to my heart, it's survivor support. And the recommendation that came out of the FAST initiative was what's called the Survivor Inclusion Initiative. And that's why we're here. So the Survivor Inclusion Initiative is a program, it's a global program where banks have created a process where survivors, upon referral from a service provider, can have access to a bank account or other services when they may not otherwise be eligible or where they may meet barriers when being onboarded. I think a lot of us have had challenges in the past with getting a bank account, whether there was a minimum balance we couldn't meet or some other barrier, we didn't have the identification that the bank personnel was asking for. The goal of this program is to be virtually barrier-free so that we can connect a survivor to a bank of his or her choice for services of his or her choice. Now, my disclaimer when talking about this program is it's really pretty new. It's really only been implemented. Those are some examples of banks that already participate, but really in its infancy, which is not great news in that they're still trying to figure this out, but the good news is we can affect it. And there's actually the FAST initiative is really focused, and I think 2022 is going to be a big year for the initiative to try and improve and increase participation in the Survivor Inclusion Initiative. So the timing is great to be having this conversation. So again, a survivor can have access to basic, what we're finding is the request usually is for kind of a basic checking account or savings account, and to be onboarded in a way that's trauma informed and supportive of the survivor. And that can look, as you all know, many different ways, depending on the preferences and the needs of the survivor. So each, I don't want to give an example. Actually, I will. I'll give Taushia's example in a few minutes, but with every bank, it looks different. With every survivor, it looks different. With every survivor support organization, it looks different. But my good news is to say that the banks have been really receptive to being flexible to what will work primarily for the survivor, but also for the support organization and for the bank itself.
So Sarah,
yeah.
in thinking of the access to the basic accounts, and we know that survivors normally have challenges because of their vulnerabilities, what are some of the restrictions?
We find that not having what banks would normally ask for the required identification to open up an account or a physical address. We looked closely at the regulations that regulate banks, and they're actually more permissive than you would think for what banks are required to ask for. Now, of course, there's regulation, and then banks have policies on what they will require, but the participating banks have been really open to feedback about, well, this person only has this form of identification. Can we use non-documentary types of identification? The survivor is going to use the address of the case manager or other, if they're engaged in a confidential address program, that can work for both the bank and the survivor. So whenever I talk about this, my only advice is for survivor advocates and survivors to be open to saying to the bank, do we really, do I have to provide this? As part of the Survivor Inclusion Initiative, I understand that this should be fairly, barrier free, and know that the FAST initiative, and I'll offer my help as well, can help facilitate those conversations with the Survivor Inclusion Initiative points of contacts at the bank.
And that was a question that I was going to ask you. If a survivor does participate in this FAST program, which sounds amazing, and they're trying to have access to banking, and they're trying to become financially stable, have there been an experience where there has been limitations of what access to banking is? Meaning, say for instance, you're able to open up a bank account, but not a savings account at this time. You're able to open up a banking and a savings, but you're not able to get a debit card at this time. Are there challenges, and what happened, and what is put in place to facilitate this or smooth this out?
Great question, and timely, because this is when all of these conversations are being had. Anecdotally, I'll say I can't think of a scenario, because I'm a referring service provider. My organization is. And so I've referred a number of survivors to a number of different banks. I haven't anecdotally experienced that vignette where they were permitted to maybe have one type of product and not another. That hasn't been the experience. What I will say that I think sort of relates is most of the banks right now are really focused on checking and savings accounts and haven't advanced yet to offering credit cards or home loans or other types of lending products. And that's not, in my sense, that's not a resistance. It's just sort of the evolution of the project, because it's still, really in its infancy. So I'm hopeful, as you said, that the types of services that we'll offer will become more inclusive over time. And the only way that's going to happen is when survivors and their advocates start asking for these things. So I have had a number of scenarios where I've been working with a referring service provider who's, said, can you reach out to the bank and see if, by chance they would be open to this type of account versus one that doesn't, charges for money orders. So every one of those instances, I've had a positive experience with the bank's response, but it's all to say, we kind of take it on a case-by-case basis.
And that's awesome, because as you said in the beginning, every survivor's situation, circumstance is different. And so another question that leads me into a question that says, has there been an experience where a survivor has opened up a bank account and a savings account through the FAST initiative, and for whatever reason had it closed? And if it should close, is it open for them to get back into the program?
The crowd won't realize that you and I did not plan this, but transition to the next slide. I swear, this is organic, everybody. Okay, so the next slide. So that happened to Taushia. So let's talk about that. So I'll first just mention, because she's not here to give her bio, but as I mentioned, Taushia is a survivor leader. She's originally from Idaho. She spent a lot of time on the West Coast, but due to her experience, she ended up on the East Coast. She is a mother, a daughter, a sister. She's an extraordinary mother, I will emphasize. She's really quite connected to her Native American roots. As I mentioned, she's really empowered. She was referred to my program in 2017. And I like to mention some of the things that we've done together, because I think it illustrates, as many people on the call may know, I don't think I've had one survivor client that only had one need. So it's an example that she and I worked together doing expunction work. We were successful in a child custody matter. We've done estate planning for her, access to public benefits. And my role personally was to represent her in the criminal prosecution of the trafficker who received a life sentence and was ordered to pay $1.8 million in restitution. So her story really is a textbook example of all of the legal needs that have to be met in order for a survivor to thrive. And that last need is this access to banking. So Taushia, this was not too long ago, because I'd mentioned the FAST program is really fairly new. Mm-hmm. She onboarded with a bank, and the bank was really receptive to helping her identify what type of account and services would be best fit for her needs. And I mentioned the money orders at no charge. Regrettably, several months later, her account was closed.
Mhm.
I'm sure, as you all can imagine, with organizations the sizes of banks, these things are done automatically without a human eye. And it was because she had exceeded the overdraft policy.
Right.
As I worked with her as her advocate in this process, and the bank was very responsive to having her re-onboarded. And this is so new that she's currently working with the banker to decide what would be a better fit. You know, perhaps an account that didn't have a penalty for just wouldn't allow an overdraft. They're working on that almost as we speak. And I think her story is important because for two things. Don't go back to the other slide, but there was one book I didn't mention on the other slide, which was a big part of this program is making sure that the banks understand the victim experience, knowing that overdrafts might happen and that can be expected, and that we should build, you know, programs so that we can respond to that in a way that doesn't pose risk to the bank, but is also supportive of the survivor. So there's that piece of it. But then something I've really just kind of come to learn through a lot of my clients and getting involved in this work is the importance of financial literacy training. And if you want to the next slide, and I know Free to Thrive in the Academy in particular is so focused on this. So I'm preaching to you, but this is a screenshot of some materials put out by Bank of America, which is one of the participating banks for the FAST initiative, that just gives, again, there's much more fulsome material. These are just screenshots, but to help educate survivors and other customers that are involved in their financial inclusion program to kind of know the basics. And, you know, Taushia and I talked about that. She said, I needed more training on how to manage this account and what would happen if I overdraft and you know, what you know, the risks might be for me as a survivor and not having continuity in services. So while in the beginning, at least my focus was on getting, you know, the banks on board and increasing survivors that access services, I'm now focused on continuity of services. So this literacy piece is really a focus right now. So I'm so glad that Free to Thrive has been so focused on it.
And I love that you said the continuity. It's one thing to open a bank account or open a savings account, but it's another thing of that experience of being rejected and it closed and there's no safeguard to get that back open when we know financial independence is key to survivors not being vulnerable and finding themselves in situations where they have to look to alternatives. If I may, I asked you about the restrictions and you said identification. And I wonder, or I would like to ask is whether a survivor is currently working or getting public assistance. Is that any barrier for them being able to open a checking account or a savings account?
Nope, my response is a quick no, but with a caveat that I've mentioned before is each bank, one of the nice things about this program is that each bank really has a lot of autonomy in how they're going to manage the program. So that's good and it gives everybody a lot of flexibility. But at the same time, when I say no, I have a little caveat that maybe there's a bank I'm not aware of that has an employment requirement, but I have not seen that to date.
Thank you.
And, you know, we were talked a little bit about credit. You know, I was recently talking with some points of contact at one participating bank that explained to me that they do a credit check before onboarding, you know, as part of their risk mitigation for anything that they open. But that for the Survivor Inclusion Initiative, it's you know, it's called like a soft check, and that they waive any negative results. So I was pleased to hear that because that's a practical example of the goals that the FAST initiative is trying to achieve with getting rid of the barriers that a survivor might meet if they, you know, just walked into a branch to try to open up an account, not as part of this program.
Awesome. Super excited.
So one thing I want to mention, again, she's a far better speaker than I am, but when Taushia and I have talked in circles like this before, when we talk about financial literacy, she does a great job of explaining it's not just financial literacy and understanding how to budget and, you know, bank accounts and the difference of accounts and, you know, what you should try to avoid and all of that. But she talks about the re-education that she's had to do personally and with supportive service providers, where she talks about how money for so long had been used as a weapon against her, and it was something bad. It was a symbol of something very, very harmful and something that overpowered her, and that it took a really long time for her to reframe in her mind and her heart that money can be a source of empowerment and not harm. And I think she still, sometimes struggles with that and has to continue to reframe that money really can be a positive, particularly if it's protected in a way like through the financial sector, that it can be really empowering. And most importantly, a way to avoid re-victimization because someone has financial security that supports their independence, and then they don't, may not have to become dependent on somebody else. So
I think that is awesome in your sharing. I would question is, when for the participating banks, and there were a number of them, and that is awesome because that means that is more opportunity for survivors. Question is, once they open up a bank account, savings account, and eventually a credit card, will they have to go to a certain line or to a certain teller in order to get banking services where they feel like they are segregated? Or do they, once the account is open, they would just go to the bank in a normal fashion?
In my experience as a referring service provider, it's just as you had described. The onboarding process is specialized in that the points of contact at the banks and the service provider connect with each other. And, these accounts are being opened all over the world, all over the country. So of course, the on-the-ground banker in Phoenix, Arizona would be involved in this program, but the point of contact at that bank would communicate with that banker on the ground to explain the Survivor Inclusion Initiative. And if anyone is interested in giving feedback, I have heard some different opinions about whether or not survivors would want anonymity in that process. But the inverse argument to that is, well, in order to achieve the goals of the project, it would seem that the accounts need to be flagged as a Survivor Inclusion Initiative account so that those penalties and barriers are avoided, but also so that the survivor is supported in a trauma-informed way. So I guess is that outweighs a desire for anonymity, sort of where it stands now, but I'm always open to feedback about that. But secondly, but as you said, but then once the account is open, it's managed as if it would be any other customer. But again, this is a work in progress, and FAST is really open to, and I'm working with them now to do, to sort of have conversations with participating banks, survivor support organizations, and most importantly, survivors about what's working and what's not working. So if working with a Survivor Inclusion Initiative contact at every point of contact when banking would be valuable, then we would do that. I don't sense that will be the case just based on the experiences of some other clients. We want to hear from all perspectives.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Sarah.
So you can advance to the next slide. I think I want to mention, in case the group isn't aware of this, but Megan Lundstrom, who leads the Avery Center, which is a wonderful anti-trafficking organization, has published this book called Survivor's Guide to Money. And if Taushia was on the phone, she would tell you how much she values it and uses it. It's very, it's very tactical. It has worksheets in it. It's really interactive. It's not just a book. So she has found that really valuable. So she would make a plug for that book. Now, taught her so much about, again, just managing finances, budgeting and all those good things. So I'll make a plug for that. But I just would love to hear questions from the group. And I will say, this was on the FAST slide, if there's a service provider on the phone or a bank representative on the phone who are not already participating in this program, we are really hoping to grow the program. So I encourage you to reach out to me. Over email is probably best, and we can set up time to chat to have you onboarded with the Survivor Inclusion Initiative. Because I don't know if I made this clear, but we really try to make the onboarding process really easy. So just like we hope it's easy for survivors to access bank accounts, we hope it's easy for banks and service providers to participate in the program. So there's really a basis of participation that sets out the expectations of all the parties involved, but there's no fee to participate. There's no other sort of mandatory obligations that would make it onerous other than honoring the basis of participation. So I hope after today, we might get some more banks and some more service providers involved in the program so that more survivors can have access.
That is awesome. I just have one final question, but I am waiting for Susie. There she is.
Hello there. Wow. Go ahead, Dion. And then we do have a couple of questions in the chat.
Awesome. The only other question I have for you, Sarah, is from your perspective, and I know this has been your baby, and I'm excited about what this can do for the future for survivors. My question to you is, as survivors are more open and welcomed into access to banking, how do you see this as helping them build a legacy to change the future, not just for themselves, but for their families? Because oftentimes survivors were impacted by something that happened to them, but that access to banking will help them become financially independent, but change the legacy for their children and their children's children.
Wow, that was a really powerful. My response will not match that eloquency. But as you said, financial independence for that particular person. Second is it will facilitate avoiding re-victimization, and potentially with financial security and the ability to grow wealth and to protect wealth, it generation changing, right? So supporting families and modeling that priority of financial security and independence for children is probably important. But another area where I think it helps is so many of my survivor clients have an understandable distrust of systems, whether it's the legal system, the DSS system, the educational system, law enforcement, criminal justice, whatever system it is, and maybe even financial services, back to Taushia's experience where money was a bad thing, it was a weapon used against her.
Right.
This might help renew or inspire trust in the financial services system, which can again beget all those other things of financial independence. So trust in systems and trust in service providers, maybe it helps there too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. Susie, it's all you.
You guys were amazing. Great point, Dion. And we always love, she does, as you said, Sarah, she says that so eloquently, but we always like to remind people that, when you're supporting survivors with things like this incredible initiative, you're helping their children and their children's children, and it's just such an important legacy. So, so great answer as well, Sarah. Thank you to everyone who have been with us this whole time. We have a couple of questions from Stephen. Hi, Stephen. Thank you for joining us today. His question, Sarah, is after getting the basic checking account, how does this account impact the survivor's credit report? In other words, does this look like a regular bank account to the credit reporting agencies, or do they know it's a special account and discount its positive impact on the survivor's credit?
Wow, that's a really great question, and one I actually have never been asked before, but I'm really glad that you asked it because it's making me think about it, and I can answer with some certainty. When a survivor is being onboarded for a Survivor Inclusion Initiative account, it's only flagged as that when it's being onboarded. It doesn't impact the type of account that they get, and I apologize if I did not make that clear. So when you sit with the bank personnel, you'll talk about what options there are. So let me give you an example. Wells Fargo has an account called, I think, Clear Checking, maybe. I apologize for not knowing the answer, but each participating bank, not because of Survivor Inclusion Initiative, but because they have really great financial inclusion programming, have accounts that are less burdensome for people who are low income. So you basically just directed to an account that might be a good fit. So for example, if you don't have a lot of money to open up the account and there's one that has a $5 minimum balance. You say, I would use that one because that's a priority for me, is to not have to pay more to open up the account. So you direct it to their regular bank accounts, which means that would help you if, you know, the relationship is successful. That would build good credit. Great question.
Great question. Thank you, Stephen. I have another question from Lupita. Thank you. And we really have not answered this. So if my client is starting from scratch and has not yet built a credit score, will tools for this particular case be discussed in this presentation, or when they go in to be part, I guess, you know, I would say be part of the inclusion services, would that be discussed?
Another really great question that I have not been asked for before. So what I'm going to respond is, I don't feel like an expert in suggesting how to build good credit, but it is so important. And I'm in lots of conversations where it's being discussed. And I heard recently, of course, I can't remember what organization is working on a program to offer survivors specifically opportunities to build good credit. So I need to remember what conversation it was, because that's so important. But to answer the question, participating in the Survivor Inclusion Initiative will do just that, will help build good credit. So that's the way I'll respond to it. Because as we talked about, having delinquent credit really can be so limiting when trying to access more credit, housing, education, car loan, any of that. So we're very focused on good credit here, which is why we do credit repair, but I'm not a scholar in how to build good credit, but I hope to become someday. Next time I come back, maybe I'll have information.
I would love that. That would be amazing. And I know Dion would love that as well. Next slide, Mira. Thank you for the great questions. Next slide, sorry. Sarah, obviously you saw the contact info if you want to reach out to Sarah. I really do hope we have banks on the webinar today. Obviously, the more banks that can be participating in this program, more access to survivors across the country in different cities and different areas. So I really do hope you'll reach out to Sarah. Sarah, I thought your presentation was amazing. I thought it was extremely easy to understand and straightforward. I think obviously it really is a game changer. And in the 2 years we've been doing these workshops, there's definitely different things that we've focused on that are helpful, but this is really just that groundbreaking thing that survivors, service providers need to really help survivors go to that next step, you know, that really important step of feeling financially empowered. And I cannot wait to see what else you do and where else this goes. I can't wait to see that list of banks grow and obviously hear amazing success stories from survivors like Taushia that are getting back on their feet, and they wouldn't have been able to do it without advocates like yourself and obviously the banks as well. So so excited to have you here today. Here's all the contact information for everyone. If you want to reach out, obviously you can always reach out to me or Dion and we can direct you to others for help. I will also let you know that this is being recorded. And for all of us in this COVID world, we've learned that if you can't watch the webinar live, we will be sending the recording out. So you will not only have all this amazing information from Sarah's remarks, but you will have the PowerPoint as well. So hopefully if you need more information, you can reach out to Sarah. And before we go, we may have another question.
Susie, I want to end after this next question. I would like to pose a challenge to Sarah.
Oh, okay. My challenge it is, Dion.
Challenge is, Sarah, that we know that for survivors to have access to banking, it will help them become financially stable as they begin and go through the process. And it will remove the vulnerabilities from them not feeling, being, or knowing financial stability. My challenge to you is that for this program, we know that credit is an issue. so that for them to become, as they participate in FAST program, that they will be connected to credit, the credit programs, to also build on that, so that again, their future financial security is stable, not fluctuating, as we know sometimes they experience. So that is my challenge to you, that FAST connects with a credit reporting service or organization that will help them, because we do know credit is also a huge component for financial stability. Don't you just love it?
Dion's really good with challenges. But I'm so excited that this next question comes from Elke. Hi, Elke, it's so great to see you. She was very instrumental in being a support to Free to Thrive, myself especially, in getting the Financial Empowerment Academy off the ground. So Elke, I'm so glad you're here today. And her question, Sarah, is where is the biggest need? Outreach to survivors or outreach to banks, or both?
I think it's outreach to survivor service providers, because the framework is now a survivor's referred by a service provider to a bank. And we have a number of, hundreds of participating service providers, but not all have even referred a survivor yet. And we don't know at this point if they offer it and the survivor is not interested. My gut tells me that's not the case. So maybe service providers more, that when we all sit down to talk about wraparound services for a survivor, that this is part of that list. Just like, how many years ago when I used to have to encourage our service providers that I work with to say, can you ask about legal needs in that first meeting? Now I want this financial inclusion to be part of that topic that's gone over. So I think that's my answer.
I like that answer.
Do you think maybe it's because the service providers are not fully clear on what FAST can do for their survivors? Or do you think that there's a hesitation because they know the circumstance of the survivor and they have misgivings about the limitations? Do you believe that could be it?
Perhaps that's it. I certainly defer to service providers on what's in the best interest they think of that particular survivor, and maybe as they triage the needs, that is not a primary need or a good time to introduce this topic. I hope it's not education, because the FAST initiative really has, particularly in the last, so September and October, they did webinar trainings for participating service providers about the ease of referring survivors. So there's definitely a push to increase awareness about the ease. But I just having opportunities like this platform to be able to get the word out about it, I think that will hopefully just, that'll increase the conversation about this, and having survivor advocates like Taushia talking about her positive, even though there was a speed bump in her experience and her account was shut down, it still was a positive experience, and she still values the importance of access to banking.
But you know what I would say to that, Sarah, which I would have loved to have heard her voice, it is the speed bump in which you really get the experience of them, how they respond to that speed bump, and where she is allowed to go from there to continue to build her legacy with access to banking, right?
Absolutely.
Super
I love
excited.
it. I love it. Next slide, Mira. If anyone on here, whether you're a service provider or a survivor, and you need a workshop completion certificate, please feel free to reach out to Mira, our marketing and development coordinator, Mira at freetothrive.org, and she will get that certificate done for you and emailed to you. Next slide, please. For future FEA workshops, again, you can always go to our website. We also obviously promote things on our social media, and if you're part of our mailing list, you will get notified that way as well. We hope to have our next workshop definitely within the first couple of months of the year next year. So stay tuned. We obviously look forward to having Sarah again, telling even more exciting news about how the initiative is moving along. So any questions, anything, you can always go to our website for updates on future workshops. Next slide. And unless there's any more questions, or Sarah or Dion have anything else they'd like to add, I just want to wish everyone a happy holiday season. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think to be a part of this incredible opportunity for survivors, and in my opinion, businesses and banks and service providers, as Sarah said, is just an incredible way to start off 2022 and Human Trafficking Awareness Month in January. So I hope all of you will spread the word as well, but we're just so grateful that you joined us today, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Can't believe I'm saying that. But happy holidays, everyone. Thank you.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Dion.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Susie. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.